I played it, sang it for free 3 times at the Primo Show Bar in Ann Arbor. Fuck we, is that what you're saying? You think you can work as hard at anything, mister? Those jowls didn't come from, those jowls came from sitting on your ass, buddy.
Rolling I actually changed it myself to Iggy Pop in about 1968, and it was because I had the nickname Iggy already, and when I started singing in a band, right away we got some press, which was helpful for us getting gigs in the area. It was real hard for anybody to get hired at that time. There were lots of bands and hardly no places to play. So I thought it's catchy, and if they like it, I'll stick with it. And I stuck Pop on the end because I liked the name.
We just heard 1970 from the Stooges, and this is the Stooges Part 2. We're once again joined by Mike Johnston.
Hello.
And this is the Requiem Metal Podcast.
Yeah, if you didn't know that, then you're retarded.
Yeah, that's Jason and Mark. And Mike, welcome once again.
Yeah, thanks.
And, in part 1, we sort of obviously jumped into, the beginning origins of Stooges a little bit, and we got to hear a lot of, Asheton's perspectives on all that stuff. And you just got to hear a little perspective, both at the beginning of Iggy towards the crowd and Iggy on his name change there. So tell us a little bit, I guess, about, Iggy and his interactions maybe with the crowd, and then the song we just heard, 1970.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we touched on in the first part of the program, is that the Stooges were really confrontational, Iggy in particular, and members of the band, from the interviews that I did and talking with them, they would be entertained by Iggy as well.
So they were never annoyed like he was upstaging them, or
no, they were curious what was going to happen and what he was going to do, and I think he, that was the whole thing, and he was really confrontational, defiant, and really freak people out. A lot of people that came to their shows, and then later the audience gradually kind of almost built like an aggression against him. That started to slowly happen through the year.
Were they almost like fight back?
Challenge back, yeah. People would come just to kind of get rowdy, and the famous Metallic KO, bikers showed up and were kind of punching them, and it got pretty violent, and so that. But it was that threat that they kind of put out there, just get in your face, and that was a good example to open it up. And
I know, like in that documentary series that you use and I use, because Mike also teaches, because I talk on the podcast quite a bit about the rock and roll history class I teach, and some of the student reactions towards things. But the documentary where Iggy's in it, and they're talking about the art rock. I don't know if you've seen that. It's not art rock, but the Wild Side part of that 10-part documentary series.
Yeah.
And Iggy talks about nicking himself and also going out and seizing women from the crowd, because it was a great way to meet women, and also falling down on his microphone stand to get attention like a little kid would do.
I teach at Delta College over by Saginaw, Michigan, in Bay City, and they had, I think, to my knowledge, one rock and roll concert there, and it was the Stooges. It was in 1969, and there's some footage of it. I think you can see it on YouTube. It was shot by Lenny Sinclair. There's no audio with it. They usually dub sound in, but it's in this lecture theater at Delta College. I think it's the only rock show. I think they banned it after that, and it was legendary because Iggy, dove out into the crowd and went out into the lecture theater and grabbed this woman and threw her over his shoulder and carried her up on stage, and she ended up being the dean of the college's daughter. And and it was just real. And there was actually film footage of this too, which it's Super 8 handheld footage, but I think you can see it on YouTube yet. Last time I checked, it was still when you look up Stooges, there's not much real footage of them, and it's one of those clips that'll show up, and it's almost hard to tell if you go online to find it. You can see American flags kind of hanging from the amplifiers in the background and stuff, and that's a good clue that you're onto the right footage. But it's one of those instances where rock and roll music was banned from the college because of them, and MC5 and the Stooges did a whole lot to stop rock and roll from happening places because they were just too much.
Yeah, that's wild.
Public access show with MC5 where the host is actually covering his ears up and making a face as they're playing.
When they're doing Black to Con. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Too great.
And we heard 1970 there too, and that's a classic Stooges song. Again, it's almost like a play-by-play of their perceptions of what's going on, and one of the classic songs from Funhouse for sure.
And again, the saxophone playing by Was that Steve on that?
Yeah, Steve McKay. He's he's the one in all of them. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I think that I can't. I think he's on that track. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, and that song, like I mentioned, I think in part one, always connected with me a little bit. Back to the footage of Iggy with the peanut butter, because that's a song that I think he's performing. It's 1970 when that's all, and that's also the tune where he drops the Radio Birdman reference, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so
right, that's
which is kind of a cool connection. Where we're going to talk later.
The mythology of the the Australian. Music,
punk rock kind of garage scene that erupts out of that.
Right. And that's almost just like a random spontaneous lyric line that they just, yank out of.
Yeah, because is Radio Birdman, is that a reference to anything
Not that I know
reality?
Of. Yeah, no. Yeah.
It's cool.
I don't, so, it's probably is to Iggy's world, but I don't know, what.
And Iggy's world is a strange world indeed. Right. So, and from the record Funhouse, which we introduced in part one, and we've got one more tune that we're going to sort of get into off of Funhouse, and that's Dirt. And why did you pick that tune, Mike?
I kind of in my line of thinking, when I think back to the 60s, and we'll call this one a record of the 60s, even though it was 1970. I think a couple of the most in your face kind of challenging put down type songs was Positively 4th Street by Dylan and Dirt. Dirt is just, from what I remember hearing an interview with Iggy once, he took this girl, went over to their parents' house and got kicked out of the house, and the guy called him Dirt and threw him out of the house, and that's the premise of the song. He's been dirt, he doesn't care. Like it. Again, it's like Dylan, sort of like the ultimate FU song. It really, and it's just, I don't know. It's one of those songs that, if you weren't a Stooges fan, it would be the ultimate, get under your skin song. I think, just the way he's singing it, the whole thing is just oozes and sees, Iggy, and defiant, and that whole. Do you think
that's added to their legacy and helped them in hindsight? The fact that Iggy was so deconstructive in a lot of the ways that he was approaching making the music, or do you think that
I think that
because it hurt him at the time, but did it help him, you think, later in terms of adding some credibility?
Probably. To him? I think so many people, and I don't, know that I fully understand it or have analyzed it that way, but I think so many people, they're symbolic of that, maybe a phase of youth too, where you're just, outraged, and like that music is sort of the ultimate statement of that part. It's like maybe the part where you don't really want to grow up kind of part, in a way. I mean, I don't know if that sounds too trite or something, but that's kind of the way I hear it. It's like it's sort of like the ultimate, like, rebel, youth, feel to it of anything I've ever heard. And I think it's great music, and it's mature music. I still really like listening to it, but it's just like, testosterone to the max, I think,
When it taps into that, I think you're right, that sort of that age of youthful, I don't want to say nihilism, because it's not always nihilism, but often it can be that sort of age of frustration, where you're sort of you're just aware enough to be frustrated by stuff, but incapable of being able to do anything about it sometimes. And I think that's where, like, punk stole a lot of that aesthetic from, and that attitude. It's just that punk didn't, maybe most of the punk bands probably didn't have the creativity to do anything with it the way that MC5 and the Stooges did. I mean, unless they were started, like the Clash did stuff.
The thing that I hear about the later version of punk, this is just my opinion, is that it's not, those bands weren't as into the music as the Stooges and the MC5. They were really into music. I mean, their music mattered to them 100%. And some of those later bands, they were almost playing music to rebel against, like, art rock, like Pink Floyd, and like, okay, let's get it back in the hands of common people, and we can just, express our,
strip it down.
Our anger.
It's about the message more than what they're playing.
Right. Yeah. But it was like the way they were playing it wasn't that important to a band like the Sex Pistols originally. I don't think. I mean, that's the Ramones or something. It's about image. It's about image starts to get way too big in rock for me in the 70s, and the MC5 and the Stooges really they were into it to some degree, but not like it got, and
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're going to get into kind of finish up this phase of the Stooges' career, which is their last record on Elektra, correct?
Yes.
And then they're going to talk about moving labels and recording the next record, and then we'll sort of come back and talk a little bit more about Raw Power. So enjoy Dirt, and we'll be back very shortly after a couple more interviews with Mr. Asheton.
inside. Just a minute. Just all.
Actually, we weren't fired by Elektra. We went to Elektra because Danny Fields had been fired from Elektra. So Danny was our manager then. Danny goes, hey, I'm over at RCA. Let's get out of the Elektra deal, because they lost their interest in this. When the Five left, they thought, well, the Five and the Stooges, they kind of go together. So the Five got out of theirs. They got fired. And then Danny wanted to take us to a new situation, but unfortunately, once we left Elektra, the band, except for myself, and Dave Alexander, was so into heroin. It was a bunch of junkies, and the band just broke up. To live in England, record, do something, and even though I wasn't going to be playing guitar, the idea was eventually I would be, but that had never happened. So we lived over there, rehearsed, and that's where we did the Raw Power album at the CBS Studios in London. And basically, we came back, we wound up playing like one show on our way back, on our way to LA from London. We stopped in Detroit and played the Ford Theater. That was our one show. We kind of previewed some of the material. It was kind of a little tease. It was very much fun. And then on to LA, where Main Man was really high rolling us. Iggy, I had stopped off in Detroit with my brother again, stay here for a couple weeks. Main Man had this beautiful house at the top of Mulholland Drive, and that was their headquarters. So when me and my brother get there, it's like they put us up in the Hyatt House, which back then we called it the Riot House. It was the Rock and Roll Hotel. Everyone stays there. So basically, I lived there for over a month, which all I had to do was sign my name. So there were giant bar tabs, and I'd bring girls in off the street, buy them steak dinners. Then James got hip to it. He's into the boutique for $50 T-shirts, cartons of cigarettes, magazines. When I finally moved up to the big house, top of the hill, I said, well, the manager personally took care of my bill because I was such a good hotel resident. The old days they had those roll-offs. They just roll out your bill. It literally took about a half hour. It must have been like a couple 100 feet long. I think for my month stay was like over $5,000 with all the stuff I charged up. I think me and my brother did like over $10,000 worth of damage at the hotel. Not destroying the place, but just signing our names to treating everybody.
So that was Ron Asheton commenting about hotel living, and then of course we started there with Dirt, and now, Asheton's kind of talking about the entrance of James Williamson into the band.
Right.
And where does he sort of come into play, and how do we get into towards Raw Power?
I might not have my facts 100% straight here, but Iggy, between Funhouse and Raw Power, the drug use escalated, and Williamson was Iggy's drug buddy, heroin, and Asheton didn't get into that with them, and so it kind of separated them, and they actually tried to put a band together without the Asheton brothers, and it basically didn't sound very good.
Yeah.
And so Iggy came back and asked him, and so they were kind of pissed at him.
But so now there's kind of rival camps almost.
Right, yeah. And then he asked him to come back and play bass rather than guitar. And he was disappointed in that, but, still wanted to be part of the band.
Fly
and still,
the flag.
Still believed in the music. And so that's kind of how my understanding of the way the band came together. Now, then Stooges fans, everybody's a little different. Some people like the Raw Power record the best, and some people like Funhouse the best. You guys both worked at the record store. I worked with a guy at the store, a guy named Tom Payne, quite a few years before you guys worked at the store. And he moved out to L.A., and, he was, Raw Power was the record for him. I mean, he just absolutely loved that record and thought Williamson was sort of the king guitar player. And, whatever. I don't really look at it, like he's better than Asheton or Asheton's better than him. But, they both really kind of had a similar approach. It was really just all out. And, Raw Power some of the guitar solos on that are pretty admirable. I mean, they just really tear up.
I mean, I think a song like that we're going to hear, like Search and Destroy, is so go for the throat in a way that I don't know if they'd ever quite gotten to that level. And and I think the other thing that makes this record interesting, I think, for Mark and I, is I heard this record after the Iggy remaster. So I was never really familiar with the more the Bowie version, which was a lot more clipped, right? I mean, it was a little bit more neutered sounding,
but not. I mean, it still was pretty raw. Yeah, it really was.
And so, how did he? Iggy at this time, how did he hook up with Bowie?
Well, again, I might have my facts, a little bit wrong here, so I apologize for that if somebody else was listening.
We always have our facts a little goofy, Mark.
But my understanding is that when Bowie was in kind of rehab, before rehab, but he was recovering, trying to cut loose from his drug use, that Bowie really liked his music, and Bowie kind of came to his rescue, if you will, and encouraged him along and tried to give him opportunity to continue, because he really was a fan of his music. And he got him like on talk shows and interview with Dick Clark and all kinds of weird things.
Was he on like the Dinah Shore show or something too? It's kind of a famous interview.
And then he's the one that had him fly back over to England, and then he was trying to put the band together, and that's when the Ashetons kind of got signed back up in the deal. And then Alexander, the original bass player, had died by this point, so they needed a bass player.
So that's why Ron started playing bass,
right?
Okay.
And so
when
they went
did the whole Iggy and the Stooges thing come in? Like, when did his name supersede the rest of the
with
band?
Raw Power.
Okay.
Yeah. He
was that.
Because
was that conflicting, or was it all part of that divide that already existed?
It was kind of part of that divide, and part of the. I think it was part of Bowie trying to hype Iggy. Like he hyped himself.
Well, he used to be called David Bowie in the Hype before Bowie and Ziggy started.
So I think he was the one that try to say, here, you gotta glam it up, and you gotta promote yourself and your image, and I think he was kind of behind all of that phase of the Stooges. Yet. And then he tried to, control things to whatever degree. But the Stooges were still pretty, raw and wild and out of control, and so their sound and their music, cuts through. Sure.
And I think lyrically, a song like "Search and Destroy," we brought this up in part one of the Stooges about this idea of being a product of a misplaced generation or something like that, almost like. When I use this song in my rock and roll class, I always use this song to sort of describe the sort of burnout feeling that people had post Woodstock, post civil rights movement, it was like they were so sick of caring about anything that now it's like, I'm a street walking cheetah with a heart full of napalm. I'm the runaway child. I am the world's forgotten boy. Basically Iggy represented like the voice of this new generation that just didn't give a fuck about anything anymore. He just wanted to be burnout, just wander through the 70s, aimlessly. Do you read I mean, am I wrong in reading some of that stuff into that song? Because
no, I think Iggy was really on a totally different wavelength. I think you're right, and that music does sort of defy the '60s, but again, they're kind of ahead of the curve, like we talked before. I think a lot of people, that had hope of change, one by one, from Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy and Woodstock turning to Altamont and Kent State, and one by one, people I think
hope
did
sort
lose
of died.
hope. Yeah. I mean, it's like, where do you place your hope? You place your hope in something that's going to get rubbed out. I mean, I think I remember feeling personally myself. It's like okay, what do you do? Where does it go from here?
I mean, like, and somebody like you that was plugged into the counterculture and plugged into what was happening. I mean, you said at this point, rather than going in this nihilistic direction that Iggy was maybe taking some of the music or glammy or whatever, you went more into jazz and kind of a different realm of discovery.
Yeah,
right?
I've always been a music person, so that's just kind of my own thing, and so and I like the Stooges for their music for sure. But yeah, I just I felt like the jazz musicians and the African Americans had been stepped on ever since day one in the United States, and so they had a history of dealing with it.
Yeah,
and their music was more developed and more mature and more refined and more direct and
nuanced and
and I just and it just seemed like it was a lot more clear. And when I started to make the connections in the late '60s between the rock tunes I liked, like 8 Miles High by the Byrds, and that was kind of a borrow from a Coltrane tune, and I started to
he's playing it like the reeds on
I started to make those connections, and I'm going, geez, every song that I really dig, these people are listening to Coltrane and Shep, and so I better get that message. I better understand it. And I just kind of went
to the source.
And then I started, seeing bands like Art Ensemble and Sun Ra, who also had a home in Michigan because of John Sinclair. Mm-hmm. And it was just like when that music clicked for me, it was just like all over. I mean, I just because they again, I don't know, the self-destructive part of it. So many rock stars, were that way, and jazz kind of went through that phase with Charlie Parker and stuff a long time before
the heroin
that.
in the 50s,
right?
And stuff,
And so the self-destructive aspect of jazz was like a movement that happened a couple decades before, and so they were kind of into other things that seemed to have more hope.
Yeah,
I guess the way I saw it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So we're gonna do "Search and Destroy" and then a song that you and I were both sort of talking about off camera, now where Mark reigns in. But like "Gimme Danger" for me might be my favorite Stooges song.
I'm there. I love that song too. I think it's incredible.
And there's something atmospheric and beautiful about it, but yet like really like coarse and angry. But yet it's controlled in a way. And I mean, I don't know.
Different than anything they ever wrote before or after, really.
Yeah, it's like that opening chord progression is so...
And the acoustic guitar and then the electric guitar solo is so right on.
It works really well, and it's been used, I was saying, in a couple punk documentaries that I use, and so I think it like connects to me in that way too, because I think of it in those terms. And then a tune called "Penetration," which is a but there's some cool like music things happening in the song too,
and vocally, I mean, tell me another vocalist could pull that off. Like it's just it's seething with penetration. I mean, I know it's like wow. It's definitely not radio play stuff, AM radio airplay, which would have been the thing at the time. I mean, this is something entirely different.
It's way off the radar screen.
And that's another thing I think is probably important to point out. Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and those bands did get airplay on FM radio, and it was suitable. This music was not, know. And so,
was there any Stooges song that ever charted?
I think.
Did I Want to Be Your
Fun
Dog?
Or one of those from the first album might have charted, might have. But that would have been it. Yeah.
And then what I've always heard, the way the punk bands will talk about it is I remember Jello Biafro from Dead Kennedys saying that what kind of happened is all this MC5 and Velvet Underground and Stooges fans from all these small towns would leave wherever their small towns were, move to bigger towns, meet each other, talk to each other, and realize, oh, you like the Stooges? I thought I was the only guy in my town that likes Stooges. And then that's when they would start bands, you know, and that's especially in New York with, you know, Ramones and, you know, that they were like the only people that were talking about that. And
I remember personally, I think as, you know, I went to some party and took a couple records. I remember taking Funhouse when it came out and just getting rode out of the place.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everybody thought I was nuts. And, I mean, you know, and a couple of years before that, you know, they would have thought I was cool for the records I brought, you know. And then I just changed. It was like, okay, you know, I don't think I ever did that again, you know.
That reminds me of that great story where Hendrix went to a dance club like in '66 and brought like some Dylan records and put them on in the middle of like a disco and like was like, you guys got to hear this. It's blowing my mind. And people were like, you know, chased Hendrix right out of the dance club and stuff. But so we've got a trio of tunes then from Raw Power, Search and Destroy, a nice little another Iggy Banter piece where he introduces Gimme Danger, and then Penetration, and then we'll actually hear from Iggy as well. And this was an interview you recorded, right?
I got it. You know, to be honest, I don't remember where exactly I got it. It was done by a British writer for, I think, Melody Maker, and I got my hands on a tape of the interview.
Okay.
And I just pulled it off from the cassette. And
cool.
And the interview is kind of, I would have used more, but the guy, you know, he's trying to convince Iggy to reform the Stooges, and he's doing this interview, you know, like in late 70s or something like that. And Iggy that kind of doesn't really, you can tell is getting really sick of this, where this guy's coming from. So the interview's kind of lame ultimately, because the guy that's doing it doesn't really, he wants it to be something.
He's got an agenda of some sort.
Too big of an agenda for sure.
But it's kind of neat because it's Iggy talking about the intensity of the music, and then some of the music
his influences
and
stuff. And he kind of just got sick of this guy's questions and took off into some directions.
Just talked about whatever he wants.
But, you know, the whole interview, Iggy wanted to talk about, you know, new values and some of the records he was doing, and this guy just wanted to talk about the Stooges. And so that was sort of the dynamic. But I just pulled a couple things off that interview.
So it'll be kind of cool. A nice little bonus gem for you guys. So enjoy Search and Destroy, Gimme Danger, Penetration, and a little bit of Iggy.
Cheetah with a hat full of napalm. I'm the runaway son of the nuclear A-bomb. I am the world's forgotten boy, the one who searches and destroys. Honey, gotta help me, please. Somebody gotta save my soul. Baby, detonate for me. Oh! Look out, honey, 'cause I'm using technology. Ain't got time to make no apology. So radiation in the dead of night, love in the middle of a firefight. Honey, gotta strike me blind. Somebody gotta save my soul. Baby, penetrate my mind. And I'm the world's forgotten boy, the one who's searching to destroy. And honey, I'm the world's forgotten boy, the one who's searching only to destroy. Hey! Hey! Look out, honey, 'cause I'm using technology.
the music, man? You can't hear it, man. And it ain't 'cause your ears either. You got a vacuum between your ears, man. What? You think you're bad, man? I think there's somebody here that must like this. We're the hardest working band in the street business. I don't care if we're the best. Give it danger, baby. Give me danger, little stranger, and I'll give you a piece. Give me danger, little stranger, and I'll feel your disease. There's nothing in my dreams, just some ugly memories. Kiss me like the ocean breeze. Hey! Will be my lover, I will shiver and sing. But if you can be my master, I will do anything. There's nothing left alive but a pair of glassy eyes
I mean,
I think that was like the Charlie Parker syndrome is what you're getting to. Yeah, I think those were attendant things that ruined the band.
Yeah.
Because when we first started, I mean, it was really about a little marijuana and a lot of alienation, you know. But that was where we started from, and also. I loved the American blues, particularly the electric blues, and I was listening to a lot of North African music, a lot of raga music even entered into the Stooges stuff because of that sort of hypnotic stream that you can get going.
Yeah.
And what was good about us, I think, came from we had a certain purity of intention that was really good, and I don't think we ever did get it from the drugs. I think that came in and really, really killed things. When I was 19 and spending my first serious year as a full-time musician, when I was really caught up in the excitement of it, my favorite musicians were in their 40s and 50s. There was the old Muddy Waters.
Yeah.
There was Junior Wells. There was Little Walter, Otis Rush, Johnny Young, J.B. Hutto, all these guys.
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra put out an album called September of My Years when I was, I must have been 17, I think, right around that age. That was when I decided to be a vocalist, that was one of the 4 albums that I would put on at home and try to sing along with to learn phrasing and tone. The others were the 12 by 5 by the Rolling Stones, the Them album with Van Morrison, with Mystic Eyes and 1-2 Brown Eyes and all that, which I liked for different reasons. And the 4th was a Muddy Waters Greatest Hits compilation. So I think it's more this thing about the youth is more a pop magazine phenomenon, but I've never associated it with the musical side of things at all. To me, the bottom line with the music is I can still use it exactly the same way I always have. If I wake up in the morning and I feel like it, I can use Winners and Losers or Real Wild Child instead of a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
It gets me just as adrenalized. I can still put on my music or someone else's and get and experience a quite wide range of emotional reactions. Or just a good adrenal pow.
That was Mr. Iggy Pop, and before that, Penetration, Gimme Danger, and Search and Destroy from the Raw Power record. And after Raw Power, things kind of get a little... This is the train's kind of coming off the tracks, right, for these guys? And
they're still trying to hold it together, and they still were rehearsing a lot. They played a few gigs, and then they...
Is that where Metallic KO comes out?
Yeah, that was one of the... It was either the last one or the second to the last gig. And they happened in Michigan. They came back to Michigan, and it was really confrontational. There were one of the Stooges, I don't know if it was Asheton or Iggy, actually got punched out pretty hard by a biker, it was violent. They were smashing whiskey bottles on stage, and it wasn't like usually they were throwing coins and things up there, and Ron Asheton said it was just really out of control. And some of these sound bites that we got actually come from the Metallic KO, which is one of the last recordings of the Stooges in Michigan, sort of the end, and it's really it's a famous record. We didn't really play anything from it other than some of these sound bites, but it's really famous, not so much for the music, but just because you can just hear the
breakdown of the band almost.
And the intensity and the anger, and there's like you can, I can't tell you what song, but you can actually hear the whiskey bottle smash up against the piano during the concert. It's like probably the only live recording where, you can hear those kinds of things. So it's really famous for that because it just sort of symbolizes a Stooges gig and maybe the most intense aspect of it. So and then after that, they just, it ended, at that point, and they broke it off. So,
but we have some songs that they were writing. Correct,
yeah, they were working on another album, and they were rehearsing pretty hard. And there's if anybody's into the Heavy Liquid box set that was put out a few years ago, there's recordings from this last kind of tour that they were doing and some studio stuff they were working on. They're raw sounding. They're not professional studio recordings. They're just sort of like, rolling a tape with a couple of mics and stuff. But you get the feel, and you could tell that the magic was still there with that music, and there's some really, really good stuff.
Yeah, and what kind of things did you hear that they were doing with "I'm Sick of You" and "I Gotta Write" and stuff like that? What direction would they have? Do you think they would have had it post Raw Power?
It still seemed to me. It just seemed more like an extension of Raw Power yet. And I could easily see it as like a Raw Power Part 2 or something like that. I mean, to me, it still has they did add a piano player on some cuts, and he plays at the can't remember the guy's name, Dunham or something, that he plays on the Metallic KO concerts in Detroit, and I don't think he was a really great addition to them. I think that some of the studio recordings without him, actually the music sounds a little better. And so, they were still experimenting and trying to, grow. I think you can hear in the tune we're going to wrap it up with, and "I'm Sick of You", both have a real strong blues, quality about them too. So you can hear that blues influence that Iggy talked about in that. So.
Now, just for people, I know we talked about like the influence on punk, but you having been around us and in the capacity of metal and stuff like that, the Stooges get name dropped as one of the early sort of pre-metal kind of acts, along with MC5. They get thrown in the mix with Led Zeppelin and Hendrix and Sabbath and sort of Blue Cheer. And where do you see them fitting into the scope of heavy music in general? From your perspective.
Yeah, I think just that. They were really one of, along with the MC5, a couple of first bands to just, turn the amps up to 10 and, leave them there and have that, overdrive, heavy distortion, be a part of the natural sound of the band, and that kind of assault. They were kind of, I would put them in a classification as kind of having an assaulting sound, really powerful. And so I think that, that does tie in. I saw Led Zeppelin a couple of times, and they were big and loud and all that stuff, but they didn't assault you really. The Stooges and the MC5 really kind of do, I think, and so I think Blue Cheer, from what I understood, were kind of like that too, where they're just like
they're kind of touted as one of like the loudest bands at the time.
Right. Cream was supposed to be really loud too, but again, Cream
was more interested in their musician, playing their
and
stuff.
I think they were, and I like Cream, but I think they were kind of, on an ego trip a little bit too, and into themselves, and I think these bands weren't like that as much, and so I think that they were, just really coming out with it, and so, but that's the way I hear it. I guess.
Where do you see that connection, Mark? Like between the Stooges and some of the more extreme stuff, or the things that we, obviously do on here? You
can see like the theatrics, like you see with like Alice Cooper and some of the later on stuff as well with Iggy, but I think more sonically, kind of where Mike was at.
Sure.
I think assault, which I'm surprised nothing's been called assault metal before. Yeah. But that's a pretty good way to describe it. And the Stooges on almost every level, kind of hitting you that with the visual approach, the lyrics, sonic value of everything.
I can definitely see like that, like when you talk about like grindcore and stuff like that, with Napalm Death and writing these songs that are meant to be like more confrontational and political, like in terms of like their just the way that they're attacking you as an audience, and Barney's sort of demeanor on stage as a
probably one of the
Dillinger Escape Plan, where like they're throwing chairs in the audience, and you're sort of like in the middle of a firefight almost. You're like, what the hell's going on? What's going to happen next?
Yeah, it started amping up to what people could expect,
kind of one-upsmanship.
Extreme music in general,
and I think Iggy is the beginning of that, in a sense. Maybe Jim Morrison, but then Iggy took it to a whole
because their sound was
place.
So different.
Yeah, the Doors were way mellow.
Restrained musically.
But
I think too. One of the things to me that's really refreshing about the Stooges and Iggy is like, you take somebody like Jim Morrison, who thought he was like a great poet or something like that, and I question that to some degree myself. The Stooges were just talking about, they weren't trying to be political leaders like Dylan or be some kind of mystic figures, or they were just out there just saying, this sucks, that sucks, I got a right to be who I am, and fuck you, and and it's just, it really just right out there, and there's something really refreshing about that, and I think everybody can relate to that about the Stooges, is that they're so refreshing. They're not trying to blow your minds, and as a result they kind of do,
that's
because
true.
they kind of stripped it down to what's powerful and good about rock music. When I think about rock music, the reasons that I want to listen to rock music, they kind of embody almost all of those ingredients. Really.
Yeah. And these last couple Ron Asheton clips that we have here, he talks about the Rolling Stones, meeting up with the Rolling Stones a little bit, and then kind of Metallic KO is sort of into this.
And the Rolling Stones, the way he describes them, I presume all that's true. They treated the Stooges like shit, and then they were trying to like spy on them to see what they were doing. So, it's like, and the Stooges weren't pretentious like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, deal with us. Here's what we are.
Yeah.
And that's the power of their music, and that to me, like where they have an edge over a band like the Rolling Stones or something, that kind of describes it to me.
Yeah. Yep. So we'll go from these last few Ron Asheton interview clips into a couple of these tunes that Mike was mentioning that came out in the Heavy Liquid CD, which would have been the fourth Stooges record. I'm Sick of You and I Got It Right. Enjoy.
But we'd just be rehearsing every night. Down SIR Studios every night. We were such good customers there that when the Stones came in to rehearse for their Nicaraguan earthquake benefit, they didn't kick us out. Nobody else was allowed to be in the whole complex but us and the Stones, which was fun because our rooms were right across from each other. And we shared a common lounge area. And whenever they were playing, which was just atrocious, I'm going, this is the Stones, man. I can't believe they were so, and they hadn't played together in a long time. It was literally like junior high kids trying to play Stone songs. And going, holy shit. And they had a big black guy guarding the door, so anytime, he was a nice fellow, anytime we got within like 10 feet, back up, go away. I'm going, hey man, I'm not going to try to get in there, I'm just listening. But when we were playing, they literally had their ears right to the door. So we were told. So we had a common lounge area, and so we're sitting there, and this so happened to be both bands took a break at the same time. So here out comes the Stones, and I'm going, gee, these guys are awfully short. You don't think of them as being little guys, but they really are pretty short little guys, And so I'm just sitting there, and there's four chairs against the wall, and I'm sitting there, and so Mick Jagger walks by, steps on my foot, and sits down right next to me. And I'm going, oh, what the... Well, he's going to say, I'm sorry, this is a way to start a conversation or something. They just totally ignored us. It was like we weren't even in the room. So much as the guy's sitting right next to me, and he stepped on my foot, and it's like, I'm not even in the room. It was crazy. And the only person later on befriended, the nicest guy, of course, Bill Wyman.
Right.
He was the only... Elton John had a party for Rocket Records, and I sat and talked to Bill for like 2 hours. I mean, he's probably one of the greatest guys I ever met. But it was fun seeing the Stones, and that was kind of the groove of the Stooges back then. Hey, Jeff Wald, it was Helen Reddy's husband. She just had her big hit, I Am Woman. And
did you get to meet her?
No, we never got to meet her, but we went up to his office.
Lucky for her, probably.
And right, he had big posters and all of her albums. He gave us each one of her albums that had her picture on it. As soon as we got in the car and we were riding down Sunset, the album's right out the window, man. Everybody tossed their fucking albums out the window. Basically, that year's worth of work, we just worked. So the same thing, we found another group of managers, the guys that managed Eric Carmen, and they did the same thing. They were nicer fellows, put us on the road, we get our per diem and divvy up whatever at the end. But by then, Iggy, it was just wearing them out. You can't go and try to top yourself on the road. It's pretty hard. When you're playing with an instrument, you have your off nights or blah, 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 you're playing. But when you're the front man, he kept wanting to try to top himself, and people expected more and more. So he was getting more wacko, he told me that he had taken acid every night, every show for a year. And I couldn't do that. And he just got so messed up on downs and just the whole impact of just doing this night after night. We wound up coming to Detroit to play that famous last show that's on an album, Metallic KO. So we do this warm-up gig. It's at Wayne at this biker bar. So we're playing along, and all of a sudden, eggs are flying. So, whoa! And so Iggy goes out in the crowd parts, and here's this big biker dude with all the studs, big leather studded glove, and wham! He knocks Iggy right on his butt. So he goes, come on, we're out of here, man. So we split the stage. We probably had 20 more minutes to play in our set. So we're back in the dressing room bitching, and these biker guys come back there and start to, get back up to intimidating us and stuff about not playing, and what is this? And I can't believe me fronting up, getting in biker guys' faces about stuff. So luckily we slipped out of that one, but while we were on the radio doing promotion for the famous Michigan Palace shows, the bikers started calling in threats. We didn't know it was the bikers, but it turned out to be the bikers. So they came to the Michigan Palace, and we're playing, and then things start flying. And I notice usually it's not sort of the regular things that you get. A lot of times you'll get presents, there'll be joints, people will throw up single quaaludes, or there'll be bras and underwear, or notes, or just funny stuff. And your danger things, which you get used to, is coins and lit cigarette butts. Because when you get hit by a flung coin, it really hurts. It's like I felt like I got shot one time when I first got hit, good solid with a coin. And then they always try to get the cigarette butts in your hair, lit cigarette butts in your hair, and then the coins trying to go for the crotch area. So that night I'm going, hey, wait a minute, the stuff's really flying. There's some big missiles. This was my first really full cans of beer being thrown at the stage. And then the classic, I'm playing Scott Thurston's off 40 degrees to my right, and with this piano, and out of the light, I'm going, whoa, something big's coming in. As it gets closer, this is so strange. It really was like slow motion. You can see the glint of the whiskey in the pint-sized bottle flying towards the piano. I'm going, Thurston, look out! And you could actually hear it on the tape. Because the mic's there, you could hear the whiskey bottle break on the edge of the piano. And it was a half-full pint bottle of Kessler's whiskey. So Iggy also got missed. Literally, the beer can missed him. And that's on the record, him taunting whoever threw the beer can. Missed his head by an inch. And it was flying. From the balcony with a big, strong arm tossing that beer can, boy, that really would have hurt. So we left, and we finally go, we got to go back out. We can't punk out. So we went back out and finished the set, and unbeknownst to us all at that time, we did not know this, but that was the very last Stooges job ever. That was the end of the Stooges, and kind of bizarrely, fittingly so.
Yeah.
of you.
That was I Gotta Write and I'm Sick of You from the Heavy Liquid stuff from the Stooges. And basically after the Stooges sort of broke up, this whole, style of music, some of it transfers over into what, the Ramones and some of that, those bands, the New York Dolls were kind of doing. But a lot of it actually goes kind of across the ocean, right?
Yeah. I think, they were, the 70s was kind of for, the type of music they were playing was sort of like the worst decade for that, I think, ever. And bands like the Sonics Rendezvous Band and what was left of the Stooges, they were trying to put a band together. They had a group together called New Order for a while, had a member from the Amboy Dukes and Dennis Thompson from the MC5 and Ron Asheton, and it didn't take off. And they kind of had, this hard rock sound. Sonics Rendezvous Band, they had a hard rock, slash, or punk rock sound. And there just wasn't a market. None of the labels were interested in that. And, the next time we see this, Michigan sound is really, crops up in Australia with Dennis Tech, who grew up in Ann Arbor watching the Stooges and the MC5 and, started Radio Birdman in Australia, and that movement that he was a part of and helped shape, really is sort of the next generation of Michigan rock, and eventually some of the Michigan rockers like Dennis Thompson and Ron Asheton go over and play in Australia and do recordings with some of these bands, and there's a definite connection, with that Michigan rock attitude and style. And Dennis Tech bought Fred Sonic Smith's one of his guitars that he used in the MC5 forever, and used that in Radio Birdman, etc., etc. I mean, just that they were trying to play a Michigan rock style that impressed them. Sure.
Yeah, and we're we've got a nice clip, a nice last interview clip from Ron Asheton where he's talking about Dennis Tech, and we're hoping down the road. We talked to Mike about this to put something together, looking at some of the Australian stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really great music movement, and would fit right in.
And that New Race and Radio Birdman stuff, and even the New Christ. I mean, all that stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, they're great bands.
And if people are looking for kind of a death metal connection or extreme metal connection, I guess on some level, this is where the torch eventually kind of even makes it over into a place like Sweden, where you see like the Helicopters,
Hives, and all that.
And the Hives and some of that sort of stuff, kind of taking that kind of nature. And even back in Detroit, the White Stripes take bits and pieces of that element, and they run in a different direction with it, but it's there, in some weird way.
Just before you guys started working at the record store, and before the internet was alive, we used to get phone calls from record collectors, looking for Michigan rock records outside of the country, and 9 out of 10 of them would be from France.
Really?
It was really interesting. And so they're like that Revenge label, and there's a few labels that documented a lot of Michigan rock stuff in the late 80s and early 90s. So there's a real interest in that music there for a while too, and I never was aware of a music scene that was like Michigan rock there, but definitely there was an audience for the music in France. It was very big. So,
and it seems like that's pretty common, where a lot of jazz musicians and blues musicians were almost more appreciated over in Europe and in England and stuff
Paris
like that.
Was sort of the mecca for that in the late '60s. So,
that's cool. So, so we've got this little Dennis Tech clip that we'll play where he's talking about meeting him and stuff like that, and then we've got one last Stooges song that we're going to sort of close things out with tonight, which is "Open Up and Bleed," again from the Heavy Liquid sort of era. And so I mean, this was a lot of fun. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you
really great.
coming out and doing this.
One last comment. I wanted to throw this in earlier, but I read a quote of Iggy's one time where they asked him to kind of, it was right around that Diana Shore television program. It wasn't on that, but where somebody asked him to kind of define their music, and he said that he saw himself as an international garbage man. I always thought that was pretty good.
That's
I'm surprised that's never been used for like some live recording.
But I mean, I guess the main thing is hopefully those of you who like the heavy thing will definitely be able to tell that the Iggy and the Stooges and all of that stuff is definitely fits into that realm. Possibility, much the same way that MC5 did that we did before.
Yeah, the rebel spirit.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just the attitude alone is more metallic than most metal bands.
Kind of stand up for your personal rights as you perceive them.
And hence
this is it's all coming back into vogue now too with what's happening in our political environment. So this stuff's more relevant than
it's always
ever has been.
always relevant. But let's
hopefully music can play a bigger. That's one thing I think is cool about this era. Late '60s. I think music played a really important role in more people's lives than it has since then.
I think now it's kind of fairly disposable or just background music.
And
or something.
that's the one. I think it's very disposable, and it's disappointing, but but.
And I'm sure
everything keeps changing.
I'm sure you talk about that in your rock class, that like I do. Just this idea of like downloading music and the idea that it lacks a certain amount of value or to keep.
Well, from my parents' era, my parents didn't even have a record player. Their neighbors did, and like to spend 60, 70 cents on a record back in the 30s, that's a lot of your income, major. So like if you had a record collection of 20 or 30 songs, that's like huge. And they would get together and bring their collections together and play them, know. And so that's how you would hear different music. Radio wasn't even really a big deal. Well, then in my generation, it was the single. And I remember like mowing lawns and shoveling driveways to get $1 so I could go buy a record. And so like a lot of singles that I bought, like 8 Miles High or whatever, when I was a kid, I can almost remember the driveway I shoveled to buy the record, And so those songs meant a lot, there was a lot of blood and guts and sweat went into having those because you couldn't just access it any other way.
You couldn't go online and download it for free.
And if you really like something, odds are wasn't going to be too many people. A couple of your friends might have it too, and that would be about it. And so it was really important to get together and share the music and hook up that way. And it's different. And I'm not saying it's worse now, but it did take away the value of a song. Then you get a record album, and then they become more accessible, and so the individual songs become less important, and then CDs make individual songs even less important. And now with downloads, I think it's even less important. So where you have certain songs that symbolize a generation or an era. That probably hasn't happened for 10 years now or something like that.
It's tough. It's tough for sure. And that's, I think, one of the I don't know, one of those sociological things of looking back at the culture of music, the lack of record stores, places where people can meet and actually converse about music, it's...
and it's really hard when you're right where you're at right now to know if it's good or bad. We always kind of think the past is better and, all that kind of stuff. So, who knows?
Who knows? Indeed. But
if you want to know, stay tuned to next episode.
The
Requiem Metal
10
Podcast.
years from now.
But let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on Facebook, Mark and Jason, or check us out on iTunes. Leave us a star rating and stuff like that, or requiempodcast.com, where you can get cool things and become an executive producer and stuff like that. Help us out. And we hope you have enjoyed. Mike, it's been a pleasure having you here. And
thanks for having me.
We always love to be able to get up to Mount Pleasant and hang out. And
we'll do a couple more sometime.
Yeah, for sure. So for Requiem Metal Podcast, I am Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Well, this is funny because it's because of the Sonics Rendezvous Band that I met Dennis Tech. He was playing down at the Roadhouse here on 23, about 10 miles out of town. And, of course, my brother was the drummer. So it's a Saturday night. I rode down there with Scott Morgan. And, hey, we'll check out the band. So I'm sitting there having some drinks, and I see these two guys that turned out to be Dennis Tech and his brother Kurt, who Kurt now flies F-16s in the Air Force. And they got a low ceiling. I mean, it's not more than 7 feet. And they're trying to hit their heads on the ceiling. And then afterward, I'm going, hey, here comes that weird guy who was dancing. So he comes up and introduces himself. It's so funny because Dennis Tech is a conservative fellow, and to see him dancing that wildly, once in a while he'll still do that. But he comes up, introduces himself as Dennis Tech, and may I call or stop by? And I guess he was just passing through, heading back to Australia. He was visiting his folks. He was in Australia getting his medical degree because they had given him a grant. And so we kind of hit it off, and he kept sending me. I didn't know the Radio Birdman existed in Australia. They were kind of like the Stooges. They were the Australian, like Stooges MC5 sort of in one.
Yeah, I think they were a great band.
But with a little surfer edge.
Yeah, right.
They had a kind of a especially in Australia, you'd understand it, because Australia, it's so beach-orientated. So it's perfect. A little kind of Stoogie MC5-y with that little surfer twist. So we hit it off. We became good pen pals, and whenever he was here, I'd see him, and one time he called up and said, hey, the Birdman went on to sign with Sire Records. I thought, oh man, what a great coup for these guys, because Sire at that time were really, they had the Ramones,
right.
They had Blondie, they were really happening. So they took them to England, and the Birdmen did a tour of England, and they did a really excellent recording at Rockingham Studios, which I guess is this house, this mansion way off in the country, and they'd worked real hard, and they played all over Europe, and then they got dumped by Sire, and they also wound up hating each other, so the band broke up. So a bunch of time had gone by, and Dennis says, hey, just for the heck of it, I offered this record up to our old record label, and it sold like 2,500 copies in 1 week. So the record company got interested in backing a tour, and Dennis said, hey, how would you and your brother like to come along? But I've got to have the answer, like literally within 2 hours. So I talked to my brother, and he just was didn't seem too enthusiastic, and he just kept hemming and hawing, and I finally said, you got to give me an answer, and then he wouldn't, so I thought, I know just who will go. Dennis Thompson. It'll be so great to work with Thompson after the terrible time we had in L.A., that we could be appreciated and play together again. So Thompson and I headed off to Australia, and it was more than Dennis Tech had always told me how beautiful Australia, with the great rock audiences Australia has. It's so true. And I'll say it today, the best rock and roll audiences in the world are in Australia. Those kids know how to rock. And it was a great situation. We toured for about a month, and at 4 different gigs, they brought in a 24-track Moby unit, and that's what became the first and the last, that New Race album. And it was a great situation. Unfortunately, it had to end, and I really didn't get back to playing any music with Thompson ever again. But then I got to go to Australia, and because of Dennis Tech, we still keep in touch. I've been to every place he's lived when he was in the military for 8 years. I went to Hawaii a couple times to visit him.
Mic off. Let's give all the people a chance. All the people that hate the Stooges a chance to clap. Who hates the Stooges out there? Well, we don't hate you. We don't even care.
I've been shoved too long. They even tried to buy my songs. Wait, no more.
Bet you wish you weren't so fat. but inside I even tried to fix and die.
Riots in the Motor City. Kind ladies and gentlemen, the Stooges' next presentation this evening will be for all you boys and girls who want to slow dance.